As I said last week, the primaries are next month. I will be making videos discussing the top 4 candidates, 3 of whom I will not be voting for in the primary, unless my choice is dropped out by May, but also why I will vote for these people in the general, because they are still exponentially better than Trump. This week is Bernie. I know a lot of my friends will be mad at me on the far left, but if you've listened to my podcast episode this week complimenting this episode, I hope you can at least understand why, while I think Bernie is a good person and a politician, his resume isn't as good as someone else for the specific job of president, which is a completely different job with completely different powers than most people, not only in America, but the world think the job has. This video, I'm sure, will tick a lot of people off. I will probably get cries of shill, but this is my opinion from the long, deep history I have of how political parties work and how primary rules work, something that most people who voted for the first time in 2016 are oblivious to, and from the outside totally looks like Bernie was cheated. This will pick some scabs of 2016, but that's sadly inevitable. So here are the top 10 reasons why I'm not voting for Bernie Sanders this primary, but I will more than happily vote for him in the general election. Number 10, his Oppo. Everyone likes to say that Bernie would have won. However, Bernie was pretty much shielded from public scrutiny because he wasn't viewed as viable except on the internet. Alt-right and Russian trolls and bots were 100% silent on his flaws, and many pretended to be supporters of him. And while he only got 1/3 of the coverage of the news that Hillary did, all of it was positive, and only 28% of her coverage was positive because it was about her emails, Benghazi, or pneumonia. Only in this election has actual scrutiny happen, and had he won the primary, his Oppo research was really juicy, and probably wouldn't have withstood the misinformation campaign of 2016. Writing a rape story in college, his inability to hold down a job and using extension cords to steal power from his landlords, and unable to pay child support in an age where you could actually survive on minimum wage, and just having a college degree, which he did, was a surefire ticket into the middle class, until he won as mayor, as well as some other shady stuff in the below bar. He may have won if he had developed a strong enough campaign early enough to win the primary, but his biggest problem is he started too late and surprised himself as to how popular he was and started signing people up for the primaries too late. And his supporters were all mad when they discovered for the first time that this thing called closed primaries and superdelegates existed, which have been in place for decades. That said, nothing in his Oppo research can convince me not to vote for him in the general, but it might make him a weaker candidate. Trump has already been accused of rape and molestation from multiple women. Bernie, 0. Number 9, ignoring harassment claims. Bernie had a serious problem ignoring and turning a blind eye, or at least being oblivious to sexual harassment claims in his campaign, and women directly complained to him, and he didn't do anything to stop it. His apology a year later was lackluster at best. It sends an impression that he is rather bad at multitasking, and the presidency is a highly complex job with constant fires to put out. That said, he didn't actually harass anyone himself, unlike the current pussy grabber president, so I will easily vote for him over this in the general. Number 8, Bernie isn't as principled as people like to believe, but he has a cult of personality that will do anything to rationalize anything he does as such. For a socialist, he had no problem breaking a strike as mayor of Burlington, and voted repeatedly for the incredibly wasteful $1 trillion F-35 program. He also voted to dump nuclear waste in poor areas, and while if he wasn't held to a standard of being an uncompromising bastion of idealism and sainthood, I wouldn't think anything of it. It's the myth about him and the image about him that has been created of Bernie as pure good and anyone compared to him as pure evil that makes this image super frustrating. He's a politician who wouldn't have a job if he hadn't gotten into politics, like so many other useless people who happen to get into politics. But his followers view him as if he has a magic wand of goodness and poops ice cream that will heal scrofula. I really am not looking forward to him when he compromises like a good leader does, and their dreams and image of him is dashed the way they were let down by Obama. The great man myth is just that, a myth. He can be a symbol of an ideal, but he's still a politician. He's going to piss you off and let you down later. That said, Trump's cult of personality is really allowing him to shoot a person in Fifth Avenue, and now he's walking into impeachment for breaking the law and locking kids in cages, and his fans admit he broke the law and don't care. Bernie's fans, as far as I can tell, aren't that devoted and are willing to hold his feet to the fire once their worship of him gets a wake-up call. Number 7, Oleg Deripaska. My biggest nail in the coffin for Bernie in the current primary is the fact that when Trump lifted sanctions on Oleg Deripaska, Bernie didn't vote against the sanctions being lifted against the man most responsible for the Internet Research Agency that attacked our election and spread misinformation wildly in 2016. His excuse? He was meeting with the women who were harassed that he had ignored previously. That's great, Bernie, but you couldn't have better managed your time to cast a vote so we at least send a signal that we punish people who interfere in our democracy? That said, Trump told Russia on live TV to hack Hillary's emails, so Bernie is my guy in the general election hands down. Number 6, Bernie has welcomed big donor money in his campaign Our Revolution, and it angered his idealistic base. Bernie's big claim to fame is that he didn't take big donor money. Well, that's great for a national candidate. In fact, it's really easy to get a lot of small donors if you have enough of a grassroots movement from all over the nation. What is really hard to do is get enough money to run down ticket without big donor money thanks to Citizens United. Hillary wasn't fundraising for herself. She easily made enough small donor donations to run her campaign. She was raising money for down ticket races so she could actually do something when she got elected. Bernie also did plenty of fundraising with the rich to get himself elected as senator, and he would prefer you wouldn't know about that, and took millions of dollars from the DNC. However, at this point, I'm going to have to break with the script and refer to the video I made Wednesday night asking how much money Bernie raised for the DNC from 2006 to 2016, and no one was able to answer. I was under the impression that the reason the DNC was so dead set against him was because he was a moocher. They took their billionaire-donated Senate Congressional Committee money to run as an independent and block the Democrats from running as a candidate, and only ever raised money for himself, and so the DNC had no obligation to be impartial to him when he suddenly became a Democrat just to run as president. I'm finding articles that vaguely appear not to back this idea up, and he dialed for dollars on occasion, schmoozed with rich people, and raised more than he got from the DNC, I think. And also paid party dues so he could be on committees and caucus with them, meaning he should have gotten equal treatment to Hillary because he was an independent in name only, and that would make the party just being jerks. But I can't find any solid data either way, so I'm leaving this one in the air. Bernie started doing the same thing as Hillary did and the DNC with Our Revolution, and people got pissed at him in an article in 2017. Act Blue has thankfully slightly decreased the need for people down ticket to get big donor money, but nowhere near enough. While I agree with him for not taking money as a presidential candidate, he's very hypocritical and silent about where he came from and what it took to get him where he is today, and isn't the perfect angel when it comes to rich donors his fans believe he is. That said, Trump is hypocritical about everything. Industries have flooded him with donations and his own lock, stock, and barrel by Putin. Not just for the loans no legitimate bank would have given him, but for the 2016 influence campaign. Number 5, he's a terrible leader of people, and has a repeated pattern of it. In the last few months, I've had quite a few burners talk about Warren as an elitist snob who doesn't appeal to the working class, even though several polls have shown that her message resonates with them pretty dang well. But then Politico reported that this BS idea is being spread internally. I thought this was more Russian troll farm crap. No, as a working mom from a working class family and a first-generation college student, she is really connecting with working people. Also, in her bankruptcy practice, she essentially was the Matt Murdock of bankruptcy lawyers, taking on cases for poor people and getting way underpaid for it just to help people out, and still became a millionaire with her husband. This is a brand new angle from the team of a guy who was literally bad at every job he took, to the point that he was stealing power from his apartment complex back when minimum wage was livable and couldn't afford to pay child support. If you find that so much more relatable, I guess that says a lot about you. But I guess since I have come from a working class family, served in the military, was a first generation college student, and have a functioning career after 10 years of rocky bump because of the economy, that makes me part of the elitists. She's as unrelatable as your high school teacher or a woman who's good at things and functions in society, while Bernie is relatable because other than yelling angrily about rich people, he would probably now be a homeless guy if we lived in an age with a modern minimum wage. If he had, say, struggled from depression during that time, and is now much more stable now that he's on meds or something like that, I could kind of understand, but there's nothing about that out there. In fact, I don't find Bernie really that relatable at all, but I'm finding that has something to do with region and class. Warren reminds me of what my mom could have been had she not gotten crazy religious, including the fact that she also was on the path to become a teacher for special needs. That said, he's recently come out angrily about the fact that his staff did this without his knowing. Sadly, the damage has already been done and Warren's polls have been dropping. However, because of this, it gives me worry about how well he'll be able to have the brain space to keep track of things when he becomes president. Will his toxic team be able to run roughshod over him and behind his back while he's completely oblivious? Bernie had a non-aggression pact with Warren. People in his camp broke it. Then her team did as well, but so many of his followers think this was an attack on him out of the blue, including Michael Moore, because the media glossed over that and wanted a fight. This is a repeated pattern with him: the DNC firewall drop, the failure to address the sexual harassment on his campaign, and now the whisper campaign against Warren his team did behind his back. This indicates poor leadership skills, too much trust in his people, and a toxic environment in his campaign. Grant's and Carter's only sin was too much unwarranted trust in their people, and only now are historians rehabilitating them. I also believe Bernie completely said what Warren said, but not as sexist, but as a judgment on the American people. It's the media wanting sensationalism that wanted to claim sexism. Why he's denying it is beyond me. Most women I know cynically agree with him, even if they support Warren and are very strong feminists, especially after 2016 when the pussy grabber in chief won. That said, he is still my number 3 guy because I'm closer to his policies than any of the other candidates after him, and he also has a plan to fix the internet to prevent another Trump. I really don't want to lose us the presidency again in 2024 like what happened to Carter. Instead of Truman's "the buck stops here," indicating that he is responsible for anything that happens done by the people under him because he's the leader, Bernie's response is, I have 500 people I can't control. That said, Trump doesn't lead, he bullies, and expects to be waited on hand and foot by people who will just magically make what he says happen, while he spends most of his day in front of the TV or playing golf. While I'm worried about Bernie's staff acting while he's oblivious to it and going rogue, that's nothing compared to what Trump does. Number 4, he claims to be a democratic socialist, but isn't really. According to the editor of the Jacobin, he actually is, as language is fluid, and he has decided to use it when it has fallen into disuse in the US. I mean, I guess if the word libertarian can move from radical left to radical right when crossing the Atlantic, I guess, sure, he can be one. That said, by classical socialist definitions, he is a social democrat, just as Warren would be, not a democratic socialist, which is about making workers own all the means of their production instead of corporations. Social Democrats, on the other hand, are fine with some capitalism, and Bernie has done less to talk about eliminating corporations than Warren has. Warren proposed a bill to institute German-style codetermination, where 40 to 50% of a corporation's board is elected by the workers, as they have just as much stake in the company as shareholders. Bernie never made a peep about this, just billionaire class, free healthcare, and free college until a few months ago, and while his plan was even more generous to workers, it took over a year longer to mention it than Warren did, and is way closer to what democratic socialism is about than just free healthcare. It may have also required Warren floating the idea and letting it normalize while calling herself a capitalist before Bernie could pick it up, where he would be considered a radical crazy commie because he called himself a democratic socialist. Either way, comparing both of their plans, both are social democrats by the classical definition and would be moderates in the SDP in Germany. While he may be a democratic socialist in the classical sense deep down, nothing he has said aside from calling himself one would label him as such, meaning his understanding of the definition is bad, or he's hiding what he really thinks. That said, Trump has no ideology except self-gratification and will do anything to help only himself. Number 3, delays in supporting Hillary and failure to kill cheating rumors. In 2016, Bernie took 2 whole months to endorse Hillary after losing. Hillary took around 1 month after losing to Obama. The internet was awash in claims that the Democratic Party had cheated. There is just as much evidence that actual cheating happened as 9/11 being an inside job. The party rules had been around for decades, and while possibly not fair, they weren't unfair specifically to Bernie, but these rules only came to light to many non-voters he got to vote for the first time in 2016. There was animosity and dislike of him in the party for coming in and wanting to be king after everyone had worked their asses off to build the castle, but there is literally no evidence of cheating. There was some evidence that there were some shady stuff in the Arizona and New York conventions, while both sides did shady stuff in Nevada, but none of that was enough to offset the 3 million vote loss and lose him the primary. That said, he did literally zilch to quash these beliefs of cheating because he was still very salty from losing. He did campaign for her strongly, probably about 3 months out from losing, but he took the loss much harder than most presidential primary candidates did, and probably did believe he was cheated, just like many of his fans still think he was. They vilified the evil Illuminati-level establishment, which were a lot of old people, because old people actually vote and young people don't. That said, Trump supports no one, is one of the sorest and most childish losers I have ever seen, and Bernie is much more grown up than Trump will ever be. Number 2, he lost. He lost by 3 million votes. What's to say he could have beaten Trump, who also lost the popular vote by 3 million votes? It's like Bernie lost by 6 million votes. That said, I will be one of those people proudly voting for him in the general, and he seems to do rather well with the Rust Belt states, which are required to win. Number 1, there are better candidates who want the same thing as he does. If you have not done so, please listen to my podcast comparing Bernie and Warren on the actual job of president. I believe Xi and maybe even Yang are much better candidates who have the skills to actually accomplish more of what Bernie wants than he actually could as president. That said, he would still be a good president, better than most of the other people running, and exponentially better than Trump was. He is currently 3rd on my list of candidates, and is far above my approval for all the other candidates, which dropped significantly after my number 3 candidate. Either way, if he wins in the primary, I will gladly vote for him, and anyone who doesn't go vote for him in 2020 is just as bad as a Trump supporter. So thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. I'm sure there was nothing controversial about this, and everyone will happily get along in the comments section, which you can do on the YouTube version of this video, or my Facebook page, After School Democracy. Link in the show notes. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis2814 on YouTube, and I have over 500 videos on different topics that I've made over the past 10 years. Please subscribe, and if your podcast site has the option, give me a like or review. If you think what I have to say informed you, consider supporting my Patreon. I'll be doing this podcast weekly and try to get it out on the same day, so I hope to see you here next week, ready to be filled with new ideas. Take care. This channel is helped tremendously by the generous supporters on Patreon. A big thank you to the wonderful Joe Taylor, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Ogrel for their support at the $10 a month Wapawet level. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.